Look, I look for sort of guests all the time here, right? And I want to do one about crazy startup ideas. And I'm going to have a guy on in a couple of weeks, and they're just launching Bark Air, which is an airline for dogs.
Amazing.
How cool is that?
I want
It
to.
actually happens. It's actually happening. It's kind of expensive, but it
I
is
want
actually
to be your co-host for that one, and Ralphie wants to join.
Yeah, exactly. I think actually someone's on it already, but let's see. It might be. Oh, hey everyone, this is Heini here, and welcome to Founders Weekly, where we cover the news for startup founders and tell stories we can learn from. Today, we're going to talk about how founders should handle sensitive political situations and another founder that's in prison. Later, and unrelated to the other stuff, we have an amazing founder on. She has sold a bootstrap company for $25 million. We are going to talk about how she made all that happen. And my co-host today is Courtney Quattrini. Courtney has worked for 20 years in PR and communications, and 10 of those years for Vivino and me. She is an expert in communications and recently made a total career change and now is in training to become a psychotherapist. And now becoming an expert in both communication and also in founders and how founders think. So welcome, Courtney. Did I get everything there?
Yeah, how founders think. You gave me a lot of practice with that.
A little bit too much?
Yeah, a lot of practice. Thanks for having me. Yeah, so I'll say I am what's called an associate therapist. And so I just have to do my disclaimer. Anything I say today is not a replacement for mental health advice.
There you go.
And so associate therapist means I'm working under a licensed clinician, but I'm mostly here with Heine as a co-host to talk about, to be the other side of Heine's experience as a founder, the voice in his ear.
Yes, and like Courtney has been there for me and made sure I didn't get into too much trouble when I spoke to the president. So far, you may knock on wood, hasn't been too bad.
That's true.
Cool.
Not too bad.
That's somewhat true, right?
Somewhat true, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, let's get into it. We'll get to the first story. Paddy Cosgrove returns as Web Summit CEO after resigning over Israel-Gaza controversy. We are not going to talk about the conflict. It is all honestly one big tragedy, but that's just not what we talk about on this show. We talk about founders and what founders should do and not do. Just to set the stage a little bit here, Web Summit is the biggest tech event in Europe and one of the biggest in the world. On October 13th, 2023, Web Summit CEO and founder Paddy Cosgrove made a controversial tweet criticizing Israel's actions in Gaza, labeling them as war crimes. Here's a part of the tweet. War crimes are war crimes, even when they're committed by allies, and should be called out for what they are. So, Courtney, let's start with the tweet here. What do you think?
Oh, this is a tough one. So as Heine said, not commenting on anything political here, but from a communication perspective, I think the question is, do founders insert themselves, should they, into these conversations? The challenge for founders, and Heine, curious your thought, is obviously you become the face of your company. And so not only are you speaking for yourself, you're speaking for your company and all the employees essentially that are behind you. I tend to err on the side of asking why. Why am I communicating this? If you don't have a clear answer, maybe you shouldn't do it.
But what if I just feel it? What if I just look? I feel this political opinion strongly, and I feel that needs to get out there. Is that a good enough why?
You didn't name a feeling. So let's remember I'm a therapist now. And so I feel like, or I feel that. So I think even starting there, what's behind that? So I don't personally think it's a good enough reason. Yeah.
Okay. Obviously, there's both the external part, but there's also the internal part, the employees and so on, right? But what about the founder just saying, look, I'm also a private person. I have a right to opinions. Is that just not the case or what?
Well, I would put that back on you. Do you feel like as a founder, someone with public channels, how do you feel about it? Do you take the responsibility differently, knowing that you are a public face? It's unfortunately, I think, a part of the job in a way.
Yeah, so that's what you're saying. Like, this is a package, take it or leave it. Either you are the public face no matter what.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so I think when it comes to founders, am I saying they shouldn't have thoughts, opinions, feelings? Absolutely not. But I think when it comes to using a public platform to convey an opinion on something that it might be a contentious topic, and that impacts the lives of many, many people, you just really need to be incredibly careful about what am I saying and why, and choosing your words incredibly carefully. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, but there are more twists and turns on this one. Let's continue. So the next thing that happens is the venture capitalists and founders say they will boycott Web Summit due to his stance. Corporate sponsors also begin dropping out of Web Summit, and this is all weeks before the big Web Summit in Lisbon, with 70,000 guests about to arrive. So Web Summit reacts and goes all in on an apology. They do tweets, blog posts, all of the above, but still nothing works, and he ends up resigning. So is it just over? Once you've said it, it's over, or what? You
I
can't just
think,
delete the tweet, I guess.
right. And based on what I read and heard, the real challenge was that the repair didn't happen quickly and
Oh,
swiftly.
classic.
It was over a series of different sentiments. And so it looked like a PR move. And so I think there's a real shift happening when it comes to corporate and founder communications, from it being something that the PR team responds to actually a group, a social task force. And the reason why that's important is because it's about what do we stand for. And so a lot of times businesses, founders, as you know, need to really be crystal clear. What do I stand
Yeah.
for? Not just what do I stand against?
Okay. What if he had come out honestly right away? Said, "Look, I'm sorry. I don't want to say didn't mean it, but something like, look, this is not the opinion of Web Summit. This is a personal opinion, and I shouldn't have put it out there." Would that
Yeah.
have helped? Do you think?
Yeah.
Did he have a shot?
So you and I have a mutual connection, a gentleman named Kevin Elliott, who I've worked with on risk communications for a long time. He's
Yeah.
developed a model, the 5 R's of risk communication. Step one in that is expressing regret. And
Yeah.
so what we mean by regret isn't, is just you acknowledging that harm was created. It's about the impact over the intent. And so I think step one, and taking responsibility for what your part of what's happening, is something that happens too late in a lot of instances.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So as soon as that tweet goes out, I guess the clock gets going, and then you have to move fast, and you have to be really authentic if you mean it. If not, then that's it, right? Okay. Still not done with this one. So the news now is that Patty is back as CEO of Web Summit, and I think this is a little bit strange. I mean, does this mean that you can just there's no need to do an apology? You just step down right away and then just come back 6 months later?
It was an interesting move. So I took a look at some of the stories that have covered this, and everyone's acknowledging there was no comment made about what happened in the fall and what was said. And so this is, what's called a pivot. And, sometimes it's a block and tackle. It's a, let's take the narrative in the direction that we want to. And so they're coming out talking about the purpose of the Web Summit brand, which is now more centered on community and micro communities, from how I'm understanding it. I don't know if you've taken a look at that. And so they're just totally redirecting. It's one strategy. I don't think
Okay.
that means you can just go away for 6 months and come back.
But sometimes that is the case, right? Because when there's press and when there's heat, hey, just cool down a little bit, then you can sort of sneak in the back door again later.
Yeah, and he's saying something
I
that
mean,
could
that does
be.
happen, right?
Yeah, and he's saying something that could be really authentic. The statement that he's made was that he took time off to reflect, and that he hadn't really had a break in 15 years, which very well could be true. I think that it's really about listening and understanding what your employees, what your customers, what your partners. I'd be curious about what the company has heard from them. What do they need to see from him as a leader and from the company to build that trust back up? And again, going back to the concept of grace, I think in many instances, we all have heard the term cancel culture. It's a really fine line deciding between, well, when do we have a discussion and say, okay, the impact, I acknowledge the impact here was harmful. Let me take a look at that
Yeah.
and really align, but the intent maybe wasn't. So, yeah.
It's about the intent. Maybe if they go back to that and the intent wasn't bad, then we say, okay, we sort of forgive you, right? Okay. Headspin co-founder Manish Lakhwani is sentenced to 18 months in prison. Along with the prison sentence, he's ordered to pay $1 million fine for defrauding investors in his Palo Alto-based software testing startup. Manish pled guilty on 2 counts of wire fraud and a count of securities fraud back in April of 2023. Federal prosecutors accused him of lying to investors about Headspin's finances to raise more money. So why do you think this happens, Courtney? We'll dig a little bit deeper in a sec, but yeah, this is not good. Obviously, you should always tell the truth in these cases. It will hit you right in your face if you don't. So what do you think?
So there's a lot of research out there that shows that founders have a different fear response. And what that means is that they take risks. And so part of what makes founders and entrepreneurs so incredible is that they have a higher risk tolerance. I don't know this person. I can't speak about founders at scale. But what I do know is that maybe there was some fear and a little bit of a risk tolerance involved. One idea, but not good. Yeah, as you said, you can never lie. Yeah.
No, you can lie about the future, meaning you can tell you have big ambitions for the future, but you can't do it backwards. That's sort of the rule. But what about like pressure and ambition, right?
Well, I would put that,
Is it
you're
too much
you're
or?
a founder. I oftentimes, I think in our own relationship dynamic, me and you've been the one who has probably been more risk tolerant. I think you and I are in agreement that I've come in and said, is that the risk we want to take? And I wonder how you feel
Usually I
about
would say
pressure.
yes.
Yeah. How do you feel about pressure? Does it drive you or does it scare you?
No, it definitely motivates me. It's a bit of both, right? But the pressure for founders sometimes is just insane, right? And not gonna cover up for this guy, this thing
Yeah.
you can never do. But I understand the situation, like, oh, this is so bloody difficult, and I just need this thing to happen, and then we're fine.
Hmm.
And yeah, never do this kind of stuff. It never helps. But yeah, the pressure is insane. Let's move on because there's a little bit more on this story here. Just
Okay.
want to put that out there. So Manish personally altered invoices, lied to the company accountant, and sent slide decks with fraudulent information to investors. He resigned as CEO after an audit probe. Headspin's valuation fell from unicorn status to 300 million.
Yeah.
During sentencing, Manish apologized to investors and broke down in tears. And I just think this is, it just shows that look, he totally broke down. He didn't want to do this and was full of regret. So yeah, what do you think?
I mean, like you said, obviously we can't condone any part of this. What we can say is, he's a human being and human beings are flawed. And
Yeah.
make mistakes. And so, what I get curious about, Heine, is the impact of just the past several years in terms of the VC world in general, and the pressure, like you're mentioning, to succeed, and the role that VCs have in all of this. I've been reading a lot about investors maybe not doing due diligence, and so I don't know. There's something that seems like it's shifting in this space in general that seems like it's relevant here. I
You
don't know
mean they do less due diligence or more due diligence? How do you mean?
that there's a now becoming more of a responsibility to do more due diligence. Part of
Yeah.
what I understand too about founders is there's certain characteristics and qualities that are charming and that are convincing, and neither of those are negative or bad words, but I think there's the founder personality, and that a
Yeah.
founder, and then there's the proof behind the pudding. And I think what I'm reading and understanding and hearing is that the proof in the pudding, there's going to be more due diligence, or there needs to be.
I think there have been cases where I think like WeWork could be an example, right? Where the charm and the personality has just driven it too far, right?
Yeah.
And we need to know our numbers a little bit better here and really make sure things are okay. these kinds of things are hard to protect yourself against, right?
Yeah.
Because you do have some fundamental trust, and this is very, very rare. This
Yeah.
almost never happens. It's very, very rare that these things happen, fortunately. So they're really difficult. But I agree that there's a little bit more scrutiny. Money isn't as loose as it was before.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. But wow, that's a big one.
Yeah, it's a big one. We are back. Today's guest is Sharon Gillenwater. Sharon is a co-founder and ex-CEO of Boardroom Insiders. They were bootstrapped, and she sold the company a couple of years ago for $25 million. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you.
So what did Boardroom Insiders do?
Boardroom Insiders started out as a database of C-level executive profiles for C-suite executives in the Fortune 500. And I started it because I had been doing marketing consulting for a lot of the major tech companies in the Bay Area. And they started to see that they needed to be able to sell their products into the C-suite because technology was becoming fundamental to every organization. These deals were getting bigger and bigger into the nine figures, and the technology was touching every part of the organization. So C-suite executives were starting to realize, hey, I need to know what we're installing here and how it's going to affect the organization and how much it's going to cost. So that's how it started. And a few years into it, we actually built a software on top of the database that could quickly surface insights about groups of executives. And that's really when we kind of blew up, is when we added that software layer.
And they would pay for a subscription? How did it work?
Yes, it was an annual subscription model. So they would pay for a subscription. So once we had the two products, essentially the core profile database and then the what we called BI Pro, which allowed you to analyze groups of executives, you had to buy a subscription to the core product, and then you could add on a subscription to that premium product.
Okay. So and with no invest, you might have raised a little bit, but primarily bootstrap, right? How did you manage to grow the business?
Well, slowly. Slowly over the course of 14 years, we got to about 5 million in annual recurring revenue. And, we never honestly figured out our sales model, our sales repeat model, and that, what really works in terms of the funnel. What really did work for us was referrals and
Okay.
word of mouth and people moving from tech company to tech company and bringing us along the way. For that reason, it was a very niche product.
Could it also be the reason why? I don't know if you tried. Did you try to raise money?
We didn't make a concerted effort. I mean, we had quite a few conversations over the years. When I first
Yeah.
started out, I didn't want to raise money because I had raised money at a previous startup and that kind of killed the business. And so I didn't want to when I started out, but there were a few inflection points over the years where we thought, wow, it would really be helpful to have a few $100,000 to complete this, data set or this project. And when we did talk to VCs, they said that it just wasn't of a scale that they were
No.
interested in.
I mean, that was sort of when you started talking about that before. It's a very niche product. I can imagine them coming back to say, look, this is a great business, but it might not be a fundable business, right? Because maybe the TAM it just isn't big enough, right?
Yeah, and the other thing they didn't like about us is that we used people to gather most of our information.
No.
I mean, we had automated tools in place to make our people as efficient as they could be, but we were committed to having people gather and confirm and also make judgments about the types of information that would
Yeah.
be useful to C-suite sellers. That takes tremendous business acumen. One of the problems with the internet today, as it's expanded exponentially, is you just have too much information out there and you don't know what's still accurate. You don't know what's relevant. Sometimes it's hard to find out if a certain executive is even still in their role,
Totally.
because a lot of people move on from their roles and they don't change their LinkedIn for a long time. So you can't rely on that. And so that was another value that we provided, is we tracked executive changes, not just relying on LinkedIn, but relying on other sources
Okay.
that our teams combed through every day.
Just make sure first that I understand. I'm going to maybe paraphrase what I heard from you about the business a little bit. So, your primary audience was sales teams that were looking to reach the C-suite. Is that right?
Those were the end users for the most part, although marketers use them as well. But one of the things we found out early on is that marketing holds the budget for tools like ours that support sales.
Mhm.
So when we were optimizing for SEO, which we did a good job of, the names of the executives would come up on page one of the Google results. So if you imagine a salesperson is Googling the name of someone they have a meeting with next week, that would come up. But what we found out is that sales can expense a $3,000 dinner, but they couldn't expense a $150 profile.
Mhm.
So that sales would always send our website to their marketing team and say, hey, any chance we can get a subscription to this? So we were always pushed to marketing.
Yeah.
And so we, had to sell into marketing, but knowing that the end user was sales. And a lot of times marketers, depending on what kind of program they were working on, they would take information from our database and package it up in a different format and send it to sales. So there were times when our brand wasn't even on that content that went to sales because they were packaging it up, usually with some other types of internal information that they wanted to
Oh, there was
include about the
recrossing it
customer.
somewhere. Yeah. Okay. That's cool.
Yeah, and so you said that there was a human element to this. So I get curious about the relationship component. So does that mean, what did that look like? What was the actual data that you were getting to help inform your end user? Can you share more about the types of data?
Yeah, so there was just basic biographical data going back to the beginning of their career, with the years that they were in those roles. Because what we were doing is using the time frame as well as keywords in their titles, and of course what the company was, to map them against other people. So that was really important to our customers. If you imagine executive to executive engagement from customer company to vendor company, we would find incredible connections between the executives at, say, Cisco, and then a company that they were targeting. That drove decisions around executive sponsorship, event attendance, etc. So there was all that biographical information, alma mater, hobbies, which helped with relationship mapping. Key business initiatives. And the reason why the humans were so important in pulling this together is they would read earnings call transcripts all day. So, you might have a chief information officer or a chief marketing officer of a company who's never given an interview or said anything publicly about what they're focused on. But if you read the earnings call and you have the CEO saying, we are pivoting to digital marketing, we're going to put 80% of our marketing budget into digital this year with a focus on personalization, you can put that in the marketer's
Yeah.
profile or the CIO's profile as a relevant initiative.
Yeah, that becomes super relevant, right? So we're gonna push us a little bit forward. Is so one thing when we talk about Bootstrap, back to that core. One challenge that Bootstrap companies sometimes have is attracting talent. You just don't have the same money to offer these people, a good package. How did you deal with that? Because you clearly built a good team.
We focused on developing talent rather than recruiting talent.
Yeah.
And we did a great job with that. And for example, on our editorial team, I talked about the level of business acumen that was required to do this work and how important that was. We were able to hire people right out of school or just a couple years out of school. And we would give them a test to do during the interview process, and we'd pay them to do the test. And the test was purely meant to assess if they had a baseline of business acumen that we could work with and train, because we had an extensive training
Okay.
program and mentorship program for this team. And we found really interesting things. A longtime business journalist would not do well on the test, but a history major from Appalachian State did phenomenal on the test.
Mm.
Uh, Somebody who had experience in business research wouldn't do well, but we had a Montessori middle school teacher who did phenomenally well. So
So you
using
went
that
straight for the
test
talent, really, yeah?
we went straight for the
Yeah.
talent, to assess, do they have a baseline level of talent that we can work with? Because we really enjoyed working with them and mentoring them and getting them to where they needed to be. And then they would eventually become leaders within the company, mentoring the next group of people coming in.
So you have,
So
go ahead, go
I
ahead.
went kind of what so
Yeah.
on the talent side. So I work with teenagers, and I'm curious, shifting a little bit more to the advice you would give. I'm wondering what you might say to someone who's maybe about 16, who feels a lot of pressure in the Bay Area in particular to succeed, and is worried about having a specific skill set. Any like wise words of wisdom that you would tell either maybe your younger self or a 16-year-old that about talent and what to think about?
Yeah, that's I have a 22-year-old who's about to graduate who I'm trying to help, find a job. Be open and be curious. Opportunities emerge that may not align with what you think you want to do. And you might have a few missteps, and that's
Yeah.
okay. I mean, I didn't get into business until I was 30 years old, and I just finished writing a book about that and how I got to where I was. And it was such a circuitous path that I took, but I took something important away from every single job that I ever had, good or bad. And that can really help you, even if it's getting to the point where, as I said, okay, I'm never going to work for anyone else ever again. I just don't want to do that. It's because of the sum total of my experience that I got there.
Yeah.
And, you can take a very strategic approach to planning your career. I know young people who are doing that as well. They say, I want to get to, Google or AWS or Salesforce, and then I'm going to go from there. You can do that, but you might miss out on finding something you love, which in my case, it was the whole tech startup world. I wasn't interested in tech when I moved into San Francisco. I wasn't particularly interested in startups. I wanted to work for Levi's or Gap, but I didn't make it into Levi's or Gap, and I landed at a little startup and I loved it. And that's what propelled me to where I am today.
Very cool. Yeah. Yeah. And also, if you take a very strategic approach, sometimes, if you have a clear plan, something will miss and you will fail, and just, yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Just keep going. It's fine. Not to worry. Okay.
Or you
Yeah.
might be unhappy. I
Yes,
mean, how many unhappy attorneys have you
exactly.
met
Oh my God. All of them.
who
No, that's not true.
longer are attorneys?
Yeah.
They did it because that was their strategy,
Yeah.
and it wasn't necessarily what made them
No.
happy.
And even if you have a plan, be ready to change it, right? Just, okay, that didn't work for me. Next. So I'm going to ask you, because this was sort of on my list already. So you have a book coming. What's the name of the book?
You might have to beep me because the book is called Scaling with Soul: How I Built and Sold a $25 million tech company Without Being an Asshole.
That's why I asked the question. Look, I'll tell you a story about this, right? Because when we set up in the US, in every job post we had, we would say no asshole allowed. And then Courtney came on board and she said, you can't do that in the US. What do you say, Sharon? I should have kept that in there, right?
I would put it in. I mean,
Not exactly how it went,
That's
Sharon.
exactly how it happened.
That's Heine's version of how it went.
you know, the tech entrepreneurs do not have a good reputation, despite the fact that I think most of them are probably great people. But the highest profile tech entrepreneurs that we hear from over and over and over
Yeah.
are assholes,
Yeah.
or they behave like assholes, right?
Yeah.
And in the Bay Area, you in San Francisco, you walk around and they have these stickers, no tech bros, or
Yeah.
you know, they have a very bad reputation for a reason, and it doesn't have to be that
No.
way. In fact, I feel like they're succeeding despite themselves, because how can you retain talent? How can you run an efficient business when there's so much distraction with all this BS that's going on? I don't like to spend much time on Twitter anymore, but because some of my videos occasionally go viral there, I have to dip in from time to time. And it's really unbelievable
Yeah.
the entitlement and the arrogance and the assumptions that people will make about me
Yeah.
when something gets posted. And it's
It's
just a
ridiculous. Yeah.
toxic
Yeah.
culture. Yeah.
But
One Heine on
yeah.
that, I just want to make a point to you. So I worked with Heine for a long time as his communications person, and what I appreciate about you, Heine, as you know, and Sharon, what I'm gathering from you is humbleness and humility. And I think Heine and I had conversations about the importance of being a founder who stayed humble many times. And so like removing the egocentric driven way to run a business, that's like to me what my passion and mission has now become as a therapist too. And so Heine, just shout out to you that I think what Sharon is saying here is something that you stayed true. In some moments I've had to
drag me
razz
back.
you on.
Yeah. Back to earth, please. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
but
you.
for the most part, I think that quality is really important. So you bring in a good point there,
Yeah.
Sharon, and I love the book title.
Yeah.
Oh,
and Sharon, to add to that, and I think you're probably not going to disagree, but I agree with you. With the top has a bad reputation because they behave like God knows what. But what I see on a day, because I meet so many founders, so many CEOs, and almost all of them are good and nice people. It's just the representation up from the top that just isn't great.
yeah, and there's this whole Ivy League to Silicon Valley pipeline, and you do see a lot of entitlement there, and even assumptions that reveal incredible privilege and cluelessness. Like the founders and VCs on Twitter were asking me a lot of questions that made it very clear that they just assumed that I was rich when I started my company. Because one of the biggest questions I got was, why didn't you take the QSBS, the Qualified Small Business Stock Exemption? It's like, because I didn't have any money when I started and I needed that S Corp, to keep me in the business so I wouldn't get double taxed. Or why didn't you invest in this after you sold? Well, because I need the money to live on. Like, it's not,
Yeah.
I was just hanging on. I mean, I was fine. I live in San Francisco and I have a house. You're fine if you have that, right? You have wealth. But in terms
But there are
of
these stereotypes you're saying, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was very revealing to me.
Okay, so we are back. So one question for you, Sharon, is if you were to do another startup, would you go bootstrapped or would you look for funding?
That's a hard question. I think it would be bootstrap all the way.
Yeah, maybe your definition of bootstrap has changed because now you actually have a little bit of money, right?
Yeah, so the living expenses are not such a big deal anymore as they were when I started my last company. The other thing that I've learned, I'm still learning, even now. And the other thing that I've learned is from my videos that went viral and the comments that people made is that you can raise a lot of money as a founder and you can sell for 10 or 20 times as much as I sold for and walk away with less money.
It's very true.
If you've raised venture capital,
Very
because
true.
You're not outsmarting those folks.
No.
Like, they're going to get their money, right? They're going to get their money first. And that means that, after taxes, I walked away with about 9 million. And a lot of the commentary I received on my money video that I put out was, you did really well, because there are founders who sell for much, much more, who walk away with quite a bit less.
Very important point. Very important point. So one more question on the bootstrap. So what do you think is the biggest disadvantage? What's the hardest part about bootstrapping?
Keeping yourself in the business if you aren't rich to begin with.
Yeah.
That's the number
Staying
one.
alive.
That for us, staying alive, and just even if the business is doing relatively well, if you're not able to pay yourself enough to live, you could lose your partner, you could lose part of your team. And I think the other part is knowing when to make key investments. And I got really good at that, so that you don't overinvest in something too early that could become obsolete, or underinvest and starve your business of what it needs to grow. It's a very fine line you have to walk there.
I think you're pointing at a key thing when it comes to bootstrapping versus funding, right? Because one of the problems with raising a lot of money is that you don't prioritize as hard. You honestly make bad decisions. Let's just do that too, and that too, and that too. When you're bootstrapped, you make sort of hardcore prioritization, right? And you just honestly make better decisions.
I believe so. I mean, there is the fear factor. Whenever my partner and I would be discussing making a certain big decision, we would always pause and say, are we making this decision because it's the right decision or because we're afraid?
Yeah.
Because my partner and I had very complementary skill sets and temperaments. But the one thing we had in common is we both grew up in working class families with scarcity mindsets. And so we had a lot of fear, and one of our biggest problems was we didn't think big enough.
Yeah.
Because of our own personal baggage that we have.
It's hard.
It's important to know that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, but and you're in Silicon Valley and not thinking big enough. That's kind of rare. I will say that.
But Heine, I think Sharon's bringing in a really important piece. So we talk about fear. Heine and I hit on fear earlier when we were talking about founders. And it's a beautiful question to pose. Am I making this decision from fear and scarcity versus, the opposite of fear is oftentimes love or faith. And, so I think that's a really, really great way to look at it. And great mindset there. So, and Heine, I have a lot of conversations with couples I work with. So bringing you back to the founder couple connection about fear driving the bus. And so I think that could be something
it's a full
you
theme
play
right
around
there.
with.
Yeah, totally. Okay, I'm going to move forward here and we're going to talk a little bit about a podcast. And you both listen to all our episodes. I know that. So I have full transparency on what's happening here. And look, we're doing great. Last week, we changed the format a little bit. We go a little bit deeper on the stories and it worked really well. We were actually up 40% last week, which is incredible. Podcasts, they move really slow. So 605 downloads and the biggest week since the launch episode. So happy about that. Followers growing with 5%. And I'm doing all the numbers. They're not very good for podcasting, but you got 5% on that. The other thing that happened is that one of our shorts, actually two of them did really well. So we actually had the shorts doing 15,000 views, just the shorts from last week's episode. So that is kind of cool. What do you guys think?
That sounds phenomenal. I just can't believe how many podcasts there are out there. And people have suggested to me that I should start a podcast. It's like, does the world really need another podcast? And I know people who've started them and quit after like 3 or 4 episodes. So I think it's a tough business.
Insanely tough.
And if you can make it and really capture viewership and downloads, that's awesome.
Yeah. Pushing for that for sure. Courtney, what do you say? Are we doing okay?
I want to know what the shorts were. I'll have to take a look and see which ones you're referring to see what the commonality is there, but that's big.
Yeah, it is. And the one that did really well was a little bit of controversial view from Thijs, my co-host last week, about the Apple car and disruption and so on. So it was that kind of stuff works really well.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. We're going to push this forward. We've come to the end. So please make sure you follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And please leave a review and rating. It really helps. For all of you on YouTube, please make sure you check out Raw Startup, where you can find a lot of videos about building a startup. This has been Founders Weekly. Now stop listening and go build something.